Hello and welcome everybody, I'm OneProperVariant and this is Dev Diary number 79 for Victoria 3. Today we're going to cover what is next after 1.2, and if you know Victoria 3, if you know me and the way that we approach these topics, then you will know that today we're going to be discussing a whole lot of ideas, and I would like to see your input. Whenever you agree or disagree, whenever you have your own take, then definitely let me know in the comments, because there is a lot to talk about, and what the devs are telling us here is definitely a lot of material to work with. Now, we're going to do this, and before we start, I just want to point out something that the devs mentioned multiple times in the dev diary. All of the features discussed today are meant for the free patches, as in nothing here is DLC related. I have no idea when DLC will start coming. We already got a music DLC. Honestly, I like, what is it, music for the masses. I really like that one, melodies for the masses, I believe. Really great stuff. But all of that aside, today we're going to simply take a look at what is going on, what the takes by the devs are, and then maybe what you have learned from 1.2, the open beta, and so on. The open beta itself was really interesting to me as well, because it really leaned into the community feedback activity there. I think a lot of the community feedback really did make it into the game at that point. I mean, Doodles and I literally made a mod that then partially made it, of course, into some of the design philosophies, I would say, behind the actual game. I don't think that the code ever really truly made itself in, which is sometimes sad, because the German AI strat, I still think the Doodles AI strat that Doodles wrote is so much better than what we now have in vanilla, but be that as it may, there's a lot of very active interaction between the devs and the community, and I think that is just excellent. I would like to keep that up, so please keep that in mind. If you have any thoughts, feel absolutely free to leave a comment, because it is so important to me personally, and I think for the entire discourse around the game. Now, as I said, this is all free patch stuff, so don't worry about any gating or whatsoever. This is just about what the base game is supposed to look like in 1.3 or 1.4. Now, as I said, we're going to go through this. You can see that they have a new graphic, and this is separated into done stuff, so stuff that the devs consider finished, and then updated stuff that has been updated but isn't quite fully tackled yet, then not updated stuff that is yet to be actually taken into account, right? And then new stuff that they found to be more annoying than they thought and that they want to take a look at. We're going to spend most of our time here, I think, today with this graphic. We're going to just take a look at this. There are other notes here where when they did update something, they will mention it right here. They will describe what they're not happy with yet and what they want to do, what they want to work on. We're going to take a look at those as well, but let's just start by actually walking ourselves through this graphic, because again, there is of course a lot going on here. Let's start from left to right with warfare. Experiment with controlled front splitting for longer fronts. I'll just say it, okay? And this is a very radical point of view. I don't think front splitting is ever the answer. It is always a nuisance. It is always terrible. The worst part right now about warfare, in my personal opinion, is the fact that I need to juggle around generals. I remember in the pre-release phase, when I did the crackpot theory, I basically took the strategic region as the zone that you would assign generals to, and whenever there's a conflict in that strategic region, the general would just get active. Instead, you got situations like in Germany, like in India, where you say, okay, we have infinite front lines, and this sucks. This is just really bad. If you have one too few armies, if you land somewhere and a new front line is generated, boom, everything is awful. I hate this. I really do not enjoy this. I think it's bad. If anything, I would actually advocate for merging front lines, right? So, for example, if you attack France and Luxembourg is on France's side, there shouldn't be two front lines there. That should be one front line. Now, with that aside though, I will say that there is a really interesting idea that a friend of mine had and told me about, and I really want you to hear this, because while it is the opposite of splitting front lines, it has a similar effect. Why do we want to split front lines? We want to do this to control where our troops go, and we want to do this to get multiple battles, right? This is the general, I think, tendency of people that want to do it. I think it would be better if we did instead what my friend's idea is. So my friend was basically saying, right now, let's say you got 200 versus 200 troops. This is one battle. This is the result of one advance move, right? Once it actually ticks up, you get this battle, and that's it. What if we instead generate, let's say, 4 battles, right? And the difference, so like the numeric advantage and that sort of stuff, is slightly remixed between these battles, and maybe in these battles, if you have multiple generals attacking or multiple generals defending, maybe there's a chance that, you know, you got like 30 versus 30, maybe 32 versus 28 at some point, and all that sort of stuff is going on there. So there is some deviation there, but nothing too big, and more generals and more battles are actually occurring. So this would mean, instead of one battle that is 200 versus 200, you would have, let's say, 4 or 5 battles, where the chance of winning and the chance of losing is slightly different, because Battle A might be commanded by Commander A, and then Battle B might be commanded by Commander B, and so on and so forth. This would give you one big front line, multiple battles with, at the end of the day, the impact of one battle, Each battle would take fewer provinces, and that would mean that you could have an offensive where you win 3 battles, lose 1 battle, and you still advance, but ultimately you lost some of the advance that was viable. I think that would actually be a great idea. It would make the frontline more dynamic. It would make it so that more generals are active at any given time. And, well, at the end of the day, that a loss or a victory doesn't mean the end of the world. I've seen, you know, wars where you were in a situation, oh, okay, we're defending. If you watched my Iran series, you will know this. So we were defending, and then a bad general from Afghanistan was chosen to defend. Now, in this scenario, he might have been chosen to defend, and he might have defended poorly and lost, but there would have been 3 other battles where I won because my generals defended, right? And boom, Bob's your uncle, all of a sudden there's either no movement in the front line, or at least we're retaking what the other general lost. I would very much like this. I think it is a stronger, or it would be a stronger implementation, and it would mean that, especially in the early game, a single battle wouldn't mean the complete disaster for your frontline. Instead, you would have maybe 2 or 3 battles in the early game. In the late game, let's say a big front with 1,000 versus 1,000 units, you would be looking at, let's say, 10 battles, right? I think this would work much, much better than splitting front lines, because I would assign my generals to one front line. One general could even participate in multiple battles. I don't really see why not, right? And then they would get active as though there were multiple front lines, since there are no multiple battles. I would much prefer that. I fundamentally think splitting front lines sucks. As long as we have these multiple front lines, we're looking at a situation where you will always have an outcome at some point in your playthrough where you open up another front line, you don't have the troops or the general to actually assign to that front line, and all of a sudden you get rolled because, yeah, your troops were defending the tile to the other direction. It's stupid, I hate it. I would actually be against frontline splitting whenever possible. Quite frankly, I would unify so many more front lines. If anything, I'd say, hey, in India, for example, just assign people to a region rather than to one of the 15 individual front lines with the Indian princes. Hate it. Whatever. Let's move on. Let me know what you think, of course. Reduce the number of early game total wars between great powers. I think this is fundamentally a great thing to do. This is an interesting wording here, right? Because this is the total wars between great powers. Obviously, I think great powers clashing isn't too bad if it is, for example, about something in America or whatnot. But obviously, we're in a situation where you will often find yourself, you know, just looking at a war that has been going on for ages between France and Great Britain, that sort of thing. I don't know how they're going to do it, because this is also just an AI strat sort of limitation, right? You need to make sure that your AI understands when it is worthwhile fighting and when it isn't. I have noticed that these days, when you get an ally, let's say, for example, Britain as a secondary force, they don't actually bring all their troops. And I think that's good, because that's the opposite of a total war. Let's say, I don't know, you are Cuba and you invite Great Britain. They probably shouldn't mobilize the entire country. But when it comes to this, I'm very cautious, because it's difficult right now to anticipate how many troops a nation will actually bring. Also, pre-release, we were talking about the idea, what you could do with swaying a nation is basically promise them something, and the better the promise is, the more they want it, the more troops will they promise to bring into the field, right? So let's say, I don't know, Great Britain says, I promise 20% of my total troops, boom, that's it. You know what to expect. Right now, if you reduce this further, the total war amount, it might be difficult for the player to read, hey, is this great power ally actually going to be interesting and a good help for me? Anyway, that is something where obviously it needs to be done, but I think the implementation is going to be something to keep an eye on. Add field promotion to prevent armies going home after generals die in a war. So this is good, but the lead designer has left a comment on Reddit that I personally, I don't like it, okay? And I know that going into this I'm being very negative here, but you know me, I've always been this way when it comes to debating mechanics. I'm very critical. The way they seem to be implementing this in internal builds right now, so they're already working on this, just for the record. The way they seem to be implementing this is that when a general dies, just a random general will be promoted into that position. I think that's kind of bad. So there's a big logic behind making the player have generals. Right now, what I find myself in often, because in the early game I rarely go to war, is that I do not have any generals. I will have a big army, but no generals, because they just die and I don't replace them. This has far-reaching consequences, because it means that the clout that these generals are meant to give to interest groups isn't distributed, okay? Ultimately, when we play this game and don't assign generals, we are sort of distorting the meant distribution when it comes to the general power, right? And I acknowledge that you need to assign generals, but what I would like more is that I assign a general, and that general then, if they die, basically is left empty, but the slot, the army keeps existing for 30 days, right? And the game says, hey, you got 30 days to replace this general, or we will do it for you. I think that would be the better solution rather than, hey, he's dead, boom, here's a new general in the field. But fundamentally, I think there's an issue, which yet again goes back to the idea of maybe we should have a military establishment, a military academy, right? The École de Guerre, as it was called in France, where we have an internal hierarchy, much like we have it with politics, but in the military alone. And unless we have that, I don't think you can properly distribute the clout of the generals without having it be cheese. I'll be honest with you, when it comes to this, and we talked about this before the release of the game quite a bit, and I stand by that. I think we were completely correct, or I was completely correct at the time. I think a military academy system is absolutely mandatory to make the military power distribution, the cloud, the general assignment to a frontline, the doctrine distribution, the doctrine selection, right? To make that interesting, to make that integrated, I think you need a military academy system. Right, visualize an overview of military situation and expose more data. So they can do more there, and they said that they want to do more there, but they definitely, man, this is so much better now. When you can read, okay, this is why there were so many troops in this battle, this is what is going on. Just much, much better. I think there's no way around it. I think one thing that it is still struggling with is estimating who's going to win this battle. Obviously, the conditions will be changing since the tactics of generals are no longer static, but it has to be said, that is not at all a reliable line. I can read this sort of stuff, these sort of statistics, because I put enough hours in to just test it, but I think especially if you fresh jump into the game, it will just seem very incoherent. It has gotten much, much better, but there is still some work to be done. Now here we come to my favorite topic, increase visibility of navies and make admirals easier to work with. So obviously, yeah, this has to be done. Admirals are super annoying. Let's say somebody's raiding you, you counter-raid them, they decide I'm going to this other sea node where I will raid you now. It sucks, it's not good, and you can make this more visible, and you should make it easier to work with, but my caveat to all of this is this whole system needs to be ripped out. So listen, where I'm coming from here is that ships and navies are just barracks, but on water. And it's a really, really bad functionality. You can make this more visible, you can make it less annoying to work with, but it won't fix that my navy can be anywhere in the world instantly. My supply network does not need to be a thing. I don't need to have a navy station, a navy command at any given location. It does not matter. And until it matters, until you bring vessels in rather than just general PMs for this, I don't think this will be satisfying. So at this point, I gotta tell you, sure, make it more visible. I think this doesn't fix anything. I think when it comes to the generals, we are in a much, much better position because fundamentally this system can work beyond the execution. But when it comes to the navy, it just gets the prime idea of a Victorian navy wrong. I don't think it covers what it is at all. I will actually, I have a script basically written out actually for navies in Victoria 3 and how I would like to see them, still not breaking the paradigm of, okay, we want constant goods consumption, we want to work with production methods, we want to work with navies and the admirals, you know, playing a big role. None of that would be broken in my concept, but I'm gonna make that video as soon as possible. I mean, I have my hands full. I gotta tell you, there's so many mods coming out for Victoria 3 and CK 3 in the coming weeks. It's crazy, it's insane. So forgive me, I haven't published that yet, but I think when it comes to navies, I'm the most negative in the entire military area because they don't fit at all. They don't do their job in any good capacity. So this is something you want to work on. I think this sucks so much, you can't really work on it. Find solutions for when theaters split into multiple fronts. Just don't do it. Right? So they've done this fundamentally. They have definitely made it better. They are avoiding the pocket creation and all that stuff. But fundamentally, we're looking at a situation where it's just, whenever it splits, it's a nuisance. There's no way around it. Unless you have an infinite number of generals, which will happen at some point in the endgame, that you then assign to this frontline, right? And then you're okay if it splits. But unless you have this, it's just annoying. It's a nuisance. It's terrible. Frankly, I would still, I stand by the concept of maybe just assign them to strategic zones rather than frontlines. The last thing, generals, improve unit selection for battles, balance overall progression among fronts, add ability to set strategic objectives. Yeah, I like that stuff. I think the implementation in 1.2 is really good. I see nothing wrong with that, really. Obviously 1.2 in the open beta, the numeric advantage calculation was bugged. That is no longer the case. It's really nice. I enjoy this much more than I did it in previous iterations of the game. So fundamentally, I want to say I hate navies in this game. I think they are boring and they're a nuisance. And then when it comes to frontline splitting, I would suggest the opposite. Rather than splitting, have more battles per advance, make it a real offensive along the frontline, and at the same time keep frontlines together at any given moment. Whenever you can, pair them up. Now, that is the military, that is warfare. Let's talk about historical immersion right here. Add more country, state, and region-specific content to enhance historical flavor of countries. That's a no-brainer, right? Just keep it up. The more the better. Tweak AI to play in a more believable and immersive way. So, this is a huge issue for me. I've thought about this a lot in recent weeks. I think, especially with the tweaks mod, we are in a situation where until the 70s, there's an interesting international dynamic going on. You got stuff going on in the Americas, you got stuff going on in Europe with Italy and with Germany, but also, of course, in other situations. For example, you got the Ottomans now pushing much harder against Egypt, etc., etc. What I have noticed is that in the endgame, the AI knows who it is supposed to hate, not because it's scripted, but rather because they've had a negative history in the playthrough, right? They know that this is a situation. However, the AI just avoids each other. So what I mean here is that much of the wars that big AI nations in the late game will fight with one another aren't, for example, about colonial disputes or about making sure that you're in control of your sphere of influence rather than your opponent slowly declawing you. It's, for example, because Belgium has a revolution, and then France joins one side, and Germany says, "Hey, I hate this guy. I'm gonna join the other side." And then they just fight over that, where you can't add any other war goals, meaning it's ultimately over nothing because it's just over Belgium's revolution. And then they have a peace treaty, which means they can't go to war separately with one another properly, right? And then the next revolution comes along and they do the whole spiel again, and they catapult each other into a situation where they just never have a real confrontation. That whole thing, in my opinion, is the worst way about the AI not playing in believable and immersive ways. I hope that they kind of just change the calculation. I can see the sun is coming in here. They kind of just change the calculations there, but I think it's a general AI strategy issue of how much they value joining into any diplomatic play against their opponent, even if there's nothing in it for them. Make the AI succeed more often at content such as the Major Restoration and the Alaska Purchase. Yeah, sure. They've definitely done more to make things happen in general. The US in vanilla behaves in a much better way in general. The Major Restoration is never happening. There's also another issue here, actually, that I would like to highlight. This is going to be a dev diary. Fair warning, we're already so deep in, you now have realized this. But this is a dev diary where, after all the time that I put thinking about this game, I will now tell you what I think issues are, even if they're not directly mentioned here. There's a huge issue with the Great Qing and the Major Restoration because of the way journal entries work. So let's say you have the Major Restoration. Let's say you activate Honorable Restoration because, you know, you kicked out the landowners from government, which makes that an active journal entry. If you then have a revolution and you lose, and the revolutionary Japan becomes the new real Japan, the journal entry is gone. The Great Qing has the same thing for Fragile Unity. If you have Fragile Unity, you have a revolution, you lose it, the revolution is victorious, Fragile Unity is gone. The way it does this also is the same for unification candidates. Unification candidates actually are rehabilitated if they have a revolution, and unification candidates are also in a situation where, for example, in Europe, this is very prevalent, Springtime of the Peoples, when it does happen, if you have a revolution, you are eligible to get it again. The way journal entries work here make these journal entries much harder because they are viable to just kill them. They are able to just kill these journal entries. Big issue. Obviously, there's an AI capability. I think the Japanese, for example, just need a unique AI strat to actually handle getting rid of the shogun, whether that is via civil war, via reformation. But even beyond that, there's just a really big issue that makes it so that the AI, since they already can struggle with revolutions, might just never see this journal entry again. Have nation unifications happen more according to historical schedules? So for this one, I'm super eager to see what they're planning. It's much, much better now. I think the Germany in the OPB's tweaks mod is better than it is in vanilla, because in vanilla, in the AI strategy that Germany has, when Prussia has nationalism, they will instantly attack Austria. They have just, I believe it's an actual 1000 AI preference to do this diplomatic play. It's bad. It's not good. Wiz, however, has said, on an additional note there, that the intention is to rework national unifications, the major unifications of Italy and Germany, totally. Basically to make it so that they don't function the way they do right now, where one state can absorb other states in the customs union, and then at some point you just do the challenge, blah, blah, blah. I'm really curious what is planned there, and I'm excited for that. I think that is a really good change. Beyond that, quite frankly, vanilla should just implement Doodle's AI strat for Prussia entirely. I think it's much, much better. It's staggered aggression, basically. Prussia might declare against Austria between 1840 or 1870. There's a lot of leeway in there. There's a lot of chance in there to get different timings, different activity, and that is always necessary. But yeah, I think the national unifications, and this is something we talked about in the context of the Bavaria playthrough, the national unifications that exist in Victoria 3 have the issue that domestic politics are not connected to foreign politics at all. The consequence is that two Sicilies, as soon as they can press the button, will press the button for Italian unification, even though the Bourbons in two Sicilies explicitly hated the idea of Italian unification. There would have been no consensus like this. Yeah, the same thing in Prussia ultimately, whenever they do get it together. Every nation fundamentally on a foreign politics point of view is interested in unifying their nation because it's good, it makes them stronger. But that doesn't make any sense. You know, hey, 1848, 1849, King of Prussia could have said, I'll take the Garter crown, I'll become Emperor of Germany, screw it, I'll do it. And he said, no, this is not a good idea. I don't want the liberals, I don't want the nationalism, that stuff sucks. Screw it, get it out of here. That is a core issue. I think you can have a better and more interesting system for national unifications, and it is already better in 1.2 than it was in 1.1.2, but, and this is very important, fundamentally, similar to how I believe that to make warfare really good, you need a military academy system. To make national unifications meaningful, you need to connect external politics with internal politics. No two Sicilies should ever be interested in unification as long as they're led by the landowners. That's just the way it is. So that's a big issue for me as well, for sure. Now, make the American Civil War happen more frequently in a way that makes sense and not be easily avoidable. I think this is better. I don't think this is perfect. I think there's still stuff that should be done. There's some false positives, they mention it later as well in the dev diary itself, where if it is a revolution in which the landowners participate, but it's not about slavery, that can also spawn in the CSA, but with non-CSA borders, which obviously that really sucks, right? I think that in general, the American Civil War is actually quite easy to avoid as a player, and I think that is just, it's too forgiving, right? I think you should make it harder. Expose and improve content such as expeditions and journal entries. So, decisions. Because that is ultimately how you start these, right? The expeditions. Decisions are hidden away. They need to be moved out of that section. They need to be somewhere else. They need to have a different presentation, maybe with like an image as well, you know, similar to, for example, CK3's decisions. There's a lot to do there still, I think. I know that this says complete. I think there's a lot to do there, okay? Now, diplomacy. Add reverse swaying. The ability to offer to join a side in a play in exchange for something. Yep, definitely want to see this. Add more things to offer in diplomatic plays. Yep, definitely. Add the option to trade or at least give away states. Yep, cool. There's a mod that does that by Leah. Great mod, amazing mod. Keep up modding. Add foreign investment in some form of construction in other countries. Yeah, we need this. Improve and expand on interactions with and from subjects. Yes. Yes. Allow peace deals to be negotiated during a diplomatic play. I love this idea. Before this dev day, I've never thought about this, but I love this idea. I really, really do. We need this. That's super cool. I want to see it. Add the ability to expand your primary demands in a diplomatic play beyond just one war goal. This was a game changer, really good. Definitely want to see more of this as well going forward. But this is, yeah, fully implemented. Here, I'm a bit less positive about it, but here, yeah, this is just great stuff. But as you can see, diplomacy actually has been touched very little. Which, and this is me doing hocus pocus, okay? Diplomacy has been touched very little. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a DLC coming somewhat soon, if it was diplomacy themed, so that it makes sense in its scope with the free update that will then largely address diplomacy, right? That's my thinking anyway. So if there is a DLC, I think it might be diplomacy focused, which definitely is a great idea. Now, internal politics. Improve the mechanics of law enactment and revolutions to be more engaging for the player. Obviously, this is a good thing, nothing wrong with that, but I think that fundamentally, laws are actually in a position where if your law doesn't pass, just stop passing it. Start later, right? Like, you try to pass a law, it doesn't work out, just end it, it's fine. Change the economic conditions, make it so that other factions are stronger, and you will be able to pass it later. It doesn't matter that much. But while I feel this way about it, I recognize that many players don't want to cancel a law. It feels unintuitive, right? And if something is counterintuitive, then it might not be good design. I think changing that, making it more interesting, more intuitive, definitely sensible. I'm curious to see what they got brewing there. When it comes to revolutions, I think beyond the issue that I mentioned earlier with the journal entries, I think there's another issue here that is very, very important to me, but is somewhat overlooked. Revolutions right now oftentimes feel like a pushover or like a complete disaster, just based on the fact that no country can really handle itself, okay? When it has a revolution, whether it's the revolutionary or the other side, there's a massive push towards bankruptcy, which means that the AI that is meant to, you know, consider when it wants to negotiate a peace deal will much too often just give up because it says, I'm bankrupt. What I would like to see to make revolutions more interesting isn't actually internal politics, it's actually diplomatic politics. I would like to see a mechanic where I, as a great power, see a revolution and instead of joining in and sending my troops to die in Belgium, I could simply say I want to support this revolution, or I want to support the side that isn't the revolutionary side, and then, for example, I start giving them funding that goes even beyond bankrolling, right, to make them viable. And I would like it, let's say Belgium has a revolution, instead of Britain and France saying, we're going to go in there, we're going to fight, let's screw them. I would like something of a commitment in diplomatic plays that is just a financial commitment, okay? So, for example, instead of France and Britain, and this sort of addresses this issue right here as well, but instead of France and Britain fighting each other in Belgium, they would be sending money, okay? And they commit to this during the diplomatic play. Britain says, I'm committing to this. France says, I hate you, Britain. I'll commit to the other side. Or you say, okay, I'm gonna go in there, right, and actually defend them. I think that would make revolutionary gameplay much more viable, because then the actual surrender rate based on the very negative budget. If you split a country, the budget will always be negative because the market is completely screwed, okay? If that is the case, I would be incredibly happy if instead we could get commitments of a financial nature during diplomatic plays, and I think that would make revolutions much more engaging. But even beyond that, obviously, revolutions also just have another issue. Only one can be queued at any given time, which actually lets you exploit certain movements. If you have a revolution already queued and you do something that would get people, to start a revolution for another issue, they don't switch over to that issue right away. Anyway, my point is, I would actually like it if we could strengthen the diplomatic and financial support of revolutionary countries and the non-revolutionary countries, so either side of the civil war, by other powers, because that ultimately would make revolutionary wars actually much more interesting. The CSA, for example, collapses within a year or two because their finances are completely screwed. They're done for. Like, they're done and dusted, right? If you got financial support from someone somewhere, I think it might be much more viable to actually have a revolution. Add more mechanics for characters and give the player more reason to care about individual characters in your country. So, obviously, I'm a fan of this. I want to see more of this, but I'm not sure how it will be implemented without making it annoying. Maybe they're talking about a cabinet. That is an idea that I remember was floated during PDXCon, that was pitched by people in the workshop. There was a PDXCon workshop to come up with design ideas for Victoria 3. Maybe they're talking about cabinets here. What I would really like to see, actually, I've been testing the Great Rework a little bit, and I gotta tell you, not too big a fan myself of the Great Rework, mostly from the perspective where there's like a lot going on there, but I'm not certain that all the puzzle pieces are really fitting together as I would like to see them. But what I really liked was actually the way, and I believe they mostly must have taken this from Hoi 4, the way intelligence agencies actually work with agents and whatnot. That stuff's cool. I want to see more of that. Yeah, I definitely want to see more of that. So maybe that is what they want to do there. I'm so curious what they want to do. I would like to interact more directly in general with our characters. And again, military academies would make it so that characters become more important. Listen, I think it's a great idea. I think it needs to be in. Add laws that expand on diversity of countries and introduce new ways to play the game. Sure. I don't know what that means. Sure. My worry is just that if you add more laws, you might make it so that the AI priors laws incorrectly, never liberalizes or liberalizes too much or goes into stupid directions. Even now, it is very rare in the colonial period, so the high point of imperialism, to see European major or great powers pass colonial laws. Africa is up for grabs right now and makes to the ugliest borders imagined. Well, no, the actual imperialist borders are probably uglier, but where I'm coming from is that Germany very, very rarely will actually pass colonialism. And if you add more law categories, you run the risk, if you add too many, that the AI never prioritizes anything correctly and the entire game gets screwed over. I don't want to see this, but I'm interested in obviously what they have planned here. This is a big change. Want to see it. Make playing a conservative autocratic style more interesting and viable, but also more challenging. They did that. This is a good change. Yeah, it's fun. It's cool. We played it around. Very neat. You don't need to teach anybody learning. It's definitely more suboptimal than educating everybody extremely, because just the consumer base and everything goes in there, but it's viable, it's interesting, it's something else. Hey, you can do it, it's cool. Alright, now I actually just moved myself over here. Let's talk about other. Improve alerts and the current situation widget to provide more useful and actionable information. Right now I never use that widget. Maybe they can make it useful. Let's hope. The UI, I think, has made a lot of big jumps, and in many ways, the UI designers also, we've talked on the Discord during the open beta, obviously, and I think there's a lot of good stuff that has now made it in. Whether the current situation can ever convince me to use it the way I use it, for example, for CK3, I'm uncertain of, but maybe it happens. Let me know whether you use it, actually. That's an interesting question to me. Make it easy to get an overview of your pops and pop factors such as needs, standard of living, and radical loyalists. Yep, it's definitely much, much better. I would like even more splitting of radicals. I would like to see it on, like, a regional basis, on a more basic level. I would like a timeline, that sort of stuff. But the way it is now, much, much easier to see everything. Before that, it was just, like, in that 15 levels of tooltips. Good stuff. There's definitely a lot of good changes right there. Experiment with some autonomous private sector construction and increase the differences in gameplay between different economic systems. Yeah, their stuff's in. It's cool. I like autonomous investment. It definitely makes me approach the game differently. I really enjoy it. Will never play without it again. Tweak the late game economy and the AI's ability to develop key resources such as oil and rubber. Yeah, so I think this has worked. The only big thing that is still noticeable, and people think the issue, in my opinion, is something else. They're wrong. So basically, most people, even now, will go, there's not enough oil in the world. The reality is that there is enough oil in the world. It's just that the player, if let loose, is able to develop the economy in a way that goes too far. I hope you know where I'm coming from there. I think, when you have a curve of how the game should progress, if you go too low, you are toast. You got nothing. You will have permanent revolutions. But if you go too high, you will get, be it people rarity, scarcity, right? Or you will get resource scarcity to a Malthusian level. So basically, you have to fight over resources because everything is running out, everybody sucks, and it's terrible. And that's just not realistic in that time frame anyway, in the Victoria 3 time frame. I think that is a balancing issue, not with how many resources there are and how well they develop them, but rather how the GDP curve develops towards the end game. It becomes very, very extreme. Either because you're too slow or you're too high. In general, I think definitely a very, very positive change. Now, this is this Focus of Future Free Updates graphic. Let's take a look at some of the individual points that they raise when it comes to specific issues. We just talked about it. Let's see the dev feedback. And I am back over here. Now, this was about the issue of the military. While there's still rough edges in the military system, and we undoubtedly will continue to tweak the precise balancing here, we consider the specific issues with front progression and unit selection of battles largely resolved. Yeah, no, it's good, as we said. Increase the visibility of navies, right, we talked about this. Some improvements have been made here, such as removing the restriction on naval invasions using generals from different HQs. Yep, definitely useful, but again, the navy still works in a way that's really just not great. But we still consider navies an area of the game in need of improvement for a visibility and usability standpoint. Take the whole system, put something else in. I'm gonna make my case in a video going forward. Okay, don't worry about it. Right, they did change the stuff with the small pockets right here, as they say. They're improving battle province selection, but the issue still persists, particularly in wars with a large number of small countries, so further improvements are needed here. Merge whatever you can. Make it an area rather than maybe just a frontline. Listen, that's all I'm saying, okay? Now right here, working to expose, right, this is the expeditions and journal entries. Here's what they have to say. The journal entries that we wanted to make easier to complete and or more visible have been tweaked in the intended way, though we will undoubtedly continue to make minor balance adjustments to them. I think expeditions sort of kind of honestly, like, they're just too repetitive. I think there needs to be a lot more variation to make them interesting. And fundamentally, decisions need to be moved out of this menu, but I'm absolutely certain that they're aware of this. So it is what it is. Now let's take a look at the last two paragraphs here. I think we covered actually most of the dev comments up here in the actual talk about the graphic. Just as last time we shared these plans, the above is not an exhaustive list of everything we want to do, and I can't give an exact timeline for any of the individual points or which precise future update they will be a part of. This list also still only covers changes and additions that will be part of free updates. We're planning to continue releasing dev diaries like this, updating you on our progress after each major update to the game. Keep that up. I think that's a great choice. That is all for today's update. I hope you found it informative. Next week, we'll dive right back into irregular dev diaries as we start going over the details of what we have in the works for update 1.3. Though I'll note that we won't be ready to talk about the release date for that update. See you then. Let's see when that comes. I think Victoria 3 is on a really good path, but there's definitely a lot of stuff still going on, right? Let me know what you think. I think I sort of was able, or I hope at least, to, get across how I feel about individual topics and where my considerations are coming from. It's a big, big topic. This game is crazy, crazy complex, and I think talking about warfare means that we also need to address all of the other minor economic, internal political, blah, 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 blah issues, but I think the biggest points that I definitely care about are the Navy. It is the frontline splitting and the maybe multiple battles per advance rather than just one big battle. It would also be the issues, of course, related to internal politics not relating at all to external politics. All of these very interesting topics. Let me know what you think about them, and I'll leave it here for the moment. Later, alligator.